Are you folks here, Lucas?
They are just arriving in Boston.
Oh.
Yeah. They're missing the presentation.
We'll be your honorary.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll fill in. We're parents.
Surrogate parents.
I don't know if you're willing to take on that responsibility.
Always, always.
I'm a lot to handle.
We jump up and cheer.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Are you going to show your video too?
No, I'm actually gonna talk about a lot of stuff that I
Cool.
couldn't put in the
Yeah.
installation.
Yeah, totally.
Because there's a lot of
Yeah,
information.
definitely.
But I will. There was.
Are you able to set that up anywhere else now?
I'm gonna try and make it as a website.
Cool.
Because I think having it as like a physical space was cool to have for the ceremony of it, but didn't really allow to like actually
Definitely.
hear the 3 channels of the video. And
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully set it up as like.
And you
some-
were with, who else was there?
I was
that
with
night?
Dan Scher.
Yeah,
and
of
Jake
course.
Edwards.
That crazy mouse house he made, that was wild.
Yeah.
With all the mice in it.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah, and the truth.
Yeah,
booth.
I never went in.
Yeah.
What was in it?
It was nothing. It was just a video camera. So you're
Oh.
supposed to confess
Oh, I
your-
see.
your sins or like
Totally.
your crushes or something like that.
Yeah,
And
it
that-
seems like him. I believe
Yeah.
it. Viewer assistant. There you go. Which one's the 340 group? Like this?
Whole next thing.
Wait, oh, there's a back to it.
Oh. There.
That's a neat little gadget.
Yeah,
Probably have a different relationship.
Yes. It's coming from my Check the settings on here.
Sometimes you have to go into system preferences.
Yeah. Super audio.
Yeah.
Parents friend, parents friend.
Colby.
Hey.
You think you are, the only matters is having the white
Both
rules
maps.
classify you.
So he knows that.
Both messages.
Go to the system preferences. Sound.
Okay, then I'm out of it.
Yeah.
They're from the,
This
they're
one
from
is
somewhere.
I'm going to send you a short.
I don't know if that was.
101.
That's the one I just picked. Oh, it's not quite it. Oh, is it just an all together?
What can I say?
Yeah, no.
He's. It's crazy. He was
Silly me.
I thought when he said
It's
extract.
like a whole thing. What's
Extract and detroit there. Well, I think it was
Minerals.
natural wealth.
Yeah.
AM2
It's probably individual.
colorectal
I didn't get that at first.
adenine
There was the colonial syndrome. Oh, they saw things they could take there. And it was all in the
Yeah, I know.
the trees and.
Hopefully it works.
that were in the food.
I still have 5 minutes. I didn't know that.
Something like us when we were fishing the trout, or you could see the trout pointing and laughing.
It's It's an interesting tale.
What does this do?
Hold, this doesn't have a lock on the extension, so it locks. It's a big rubber band.
Yeah, I see.
The newer lenses have a lock that keeps it from falling open.
Visually interpret space in a way that basically choose translating it to, I don't know, I can't.
Somebody had a good idea. Make a big rubber band and sell it for $5. But it works.
Yeah, what is down wants to be like an ed researcher. You should talk to
No.
I'm sorry. I just read an article about it. It's like weird art.
No, but I want to see what
Past.
Model or something, they're always fiddling. Vision getting kind of
Had to go upside down.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
It's not about.
And I get the
That's what this
feeling,
whole article was about.
but I get the feeling some of it's very personal. Like,
I think I mean,
not just that one.
Hey everyone, hi y'all.
Hi, Lucas.
Thanks for coming. I think I'm gonna get started. So again, thank you for coming. My name is Lucas Ospina. I'm a graduating Div 3 student. My project was called Traveling Shot Over 26,000 Miles. My project, its final presentation, was an installation in the library gallery, which is on display from April 19th to the 21st. I'm not really showing too much from that installation. There will be some images, and if you want to see some of them, they're actually on display in the library gallery right now, and there's like a Division 3 showcase of visual artwork, so definitely check that out. But I would characterize my project as a research project, even though it manifested in kind of an art gallery space form. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is about the research, much of which was part of the process of making the images and the videos which I presented in the space. I think a lot of Div 3 students will say that though they poured a huge amount into the process and making and the research aspect of their Division 3 projects, not a lot of that is so obvious in the final presentation. So hopefully this will be my way of recuperating some of that, because it was just as important, if not more important. So my project, Traveling Shot Over 26,000 Miles. The 26,000 miles is a reference to more or less the distance or the radius of a geosynchronous orbit of the Earth. So a satellite's orbit of the Earth, geosynchronous meaning that over the course of one sidereal day, so roughly 23 hours, 54 minutes, the satellite, which would appear on point A over the Earth, would go all the way around and reach point A once again. The exact distance is about 26,199 miles. But the idea was to suggest that this is a project on satellites, on space, on instruments, on camera technology. I have been a film student for the last 4 years, so I very much am interested in the technology of film, the politics of film production and production as they play into this specific subject matter. The title is also a reference to a theorist named Paul Virilio, who's a French theorist, and forgive me for reading this whole quote, but he wrote that the first deterrence, nuclear deterrence, is presently being superseded by the second deterrence, a type of deterrence based on what he calls the information bomb associated with the new weaponry of information and communications technologies. Thus, in the very near future, and this is the important part, it will no longer be war that is the continuation of politics by other means. It will be what he dubbed the integral accident that is the continuation of politics by other means. So leaving aside what the integral accident is, this idea of politics by other means was really foundational for me coming to this project. Starting this year, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I was interested in interplays between analog and digital forms specific to film. But in October of 2015, a website called The Intercept published a series of documents called the Drone Papers, which were analyses done on leaked documents pertaining to the United States global drone war. Drones, the idea of politics by other means, this became interesting to me as these drone killings, which are perpetrated in Yemen and Somalia, specifically countries with which the US is not currently at war. Again, politics by other means or extrajudicial. So my project started with, subject-wise, with these US targeted drone killings, and I kind of paired this with the increasing ubiquity of what we see as drone technology in the consumer theater. So people can now buy drones that they can fly themselves. They've just instituted a bunch more regulations about them, treating them more like aircraft, but there's still aircraft in the hands of anybody with, you know, 1,000, 2,000, but going down as low as $50 or $100 can have some of this unmanned aerial technology. So this pairing struck me as a stark, if not surprising, indicator of how war and its attendant technologies have permeated and become integrated into the fabric of our everyday lives. So this email, it may be sort of hard to see, is from Donald Rumsfeld to General Dick Myers, who at the time, in 2004, was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In this email, I'll read, it says, "I am concerned that the old phrase, preparation of the battle space, may no longer be appropriate terminology for a variety of reasons, including potential inaccuracy and misimpressions that it can convey. Please think through what terms may be more appropriate in today's world. In the GWOT, or the Global War on Terror, the entire world is the battle space in the old sense, and it can be harmful to telegraph U.S. preparation." So this email is very interesting to me. It reminded me of the 2002 torture memos, if anyone's familiar with those, which are internal memos sent between different departments of the U.S. government, which, while again are not necessarily public and are for kind of internal use only, do have a huge effect on U.S. policy, especially overseas. So this idea that the war space, the space of the world in which war is located, is now no longer fixed to a specific region, but we're now considering the entire world a battle space, was super frightening to me, and again was reminiscent of the way that the United States can extrajudicially send drones overseas and kill civilians indiscriminately, many of whom are not actually war criminals. This idea that it's also a semantic discrepancy that allows for this kind of reconceptualization of the world is also super important to me. Being someone who's interested in language and meaning making through images, the fact that this is, again, just a slight changing of phrasing can have such a massive effect on the way that we interact as a country with the world. However, we can think of pretty obvious examples like the U.S. as a global police force with the 2011 interdiction in Libya, and then also, again, the extrajudicial drone killings that I've been talking about. But there are a lot more obscure and insidious examples of this that take place in less obvious fields of finance and commerce and business. So this is a tweet from the Raytheon Corporation. Raytheon is an American defense contractor based in Massachusetts. It's the largest producer of guided missiles in the world, the fifth largest defense contractor in the world. In 2015, the U.S. government awarded Raytheon $13,078,885,681 in U.S. contracts. It was the fourth highest receiver of US money in 2015. It's more than the annual GDP of Mali. And the top 4 US contract awardees, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin, were awarded in total nearly $78 billion in 2015. And that's actually kind of a low year. This tweet, the fact that it's a tweet is both frightening and kind of hilarious to me, but it suggests that beyond the manufacturing of missiles, tactical systems, and drones, the imperative for defense contractors is now to approach electromagnetic spectrum dominance, which is just a part of what is known as full spectrum dominance, which is this idealized military entity's achievement of control over all dimensions of the battle space, which again is now the entire world. Effectively possessing an overwhelming diversity of resources in areas such as terrestrial, aerial, extraterrestrial, psychological, or bio and cyber technological warfare. And that's their definition, not my definition. So as we've seen in the post 9/11 world, this means absolute dominance over the world's sensory capabilities. And that also means a lot of speculative technology. So where does this technology come from? For the most part, there's organizations like DARPA, which is the United States, basically R&D department for the defense of our country, and they usually have more public, usually expensive failures that characterize their research. But there's another arm, there's another way that the US government does work its way into the development stage of these technologies, mainly through this company called In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel is a not-for-profit venture capital firm. It also happens to be funded by the CIA, so by US tax dollars. By their own definition, In-Q-Tel's mission is to identify and invest in companies developing cutting-edge technologies that serve US national security interests. So venture capitalist companies, basically these are firms which are made up of individuals or hedge funds which invest in companies, become stakeholders in startups, and then if those companies make it and go public, those investors then make a lot of money. But in terms of the CIA investing through a not-for-profit into these companies, it's very clearly the way that the government is making sure that it's kind of up to date with what's happening in the tech world. For every dollar that In-Q-Tel invests in a company, it pretty much guarantees around 11 other dollars in VC funding. So it's also the way that the United States government is trend-setting what we see in terms of technological developments. Some examples may be familiar in one or more different capacities. So there's Perspective Pixel, which was funded by In-Q-Tel, which develops on-screen or touchscreen displays that news companies will use during broadcasts, like CNN will use this. There's CallMiner, a company that converts audio conversations into searchable databases, and this is what the NSA has been using to illegally wiretap many US citizens for over a decade now. And then there's a company called Keyhole, which was basically a 3D Earth visualization company in the early 2000s, which was funded by In-Q-Tel, sold to Google, and then became the foundation of what we now are very familiar with as Google Maps. Many of the firm's investments are not public. It was started in 1999. The first CEO was a guy named Gilman Louie, who was recruited by the CIA out of an executive position at the game company Hasbro. Before he was a gaming executive, he also licensed the video game Tetris from the Soviet Union for use in the United States. Now, if that sounds like a very absurd plot of a movie, it's because A, it is. We live in an unpropitious hell of images. And B, it's because there is a really deep-seated, deeply entrenched relationship between movie-making technologies and war-making technologies, which I'll kind of go into. Beyond that, basically any US entrepreneur who is working to create a startup in data analytics or communications technology has received a call from In-Q-Tel at one point or another. It's according to the Washington Post. And considering that 92% of startup companies fail, within 3 years, and those that don't are bought by giants like Microsoft, IBM, Apple, organizations like that. This CIA's gambling with public funds is actually much less risky than the R&D that happens in the official channels for US government tech development. Okay, so that's just one example of what I'm thinking of as people are familiar with the military-industrial complex. I've heard other people use phrases like cyber-military industrial complex. This is kind of what I'm interested in, these weird collusions between public and private organizations masquerading as something altogether different. Another example is, this is just a nice little infographic to show you the tangled webs that are weaved. This is the headquarters of a company called the RAND Corporation, another not-for-profit organization whose name is an acronym or a quasi-acronym for the phrase research and development. It's a think tank. It's the largest PhD public policy program in the world, publishes a journal of economics. Like In-Q-Tel, RAND is closely related to US defense and intelligence organizations. In the mid-50s, RAND proposed a project called Project Feedback, which through collaboration with the CIA, the US Air Force, the Lockheed Martin Corporation, and the Kodak Eastman Film Company would result in the first US satellite surveillance program. This program made up a big chunk of what I was researching during my Div 3. The program was called Corona. It was launched in June of 1959 and disguised as a medical research program called Discoverer. It wasn't declassified until the late 90s by President Bill Clinton, and many of these early satellite surveillance images you can now access on the United States Geological Survey, and some of them are even available for purchase. These early satellites were shooting film, actual analog film of the Soviet Union, of the People's Republic of China, and many other Eastern Bloc states. The film was specially developed by Kodak Eastman for these missions and was processed at their facilities in Rochester, New York. Corona and its later iterations, in terms of generations of satellites, were part of a family called Keyhole Satellites, which again was the namesake for that company that was funded by In-Q-Tel and eventually more or less became Google Maps. I'll skip over this next part just because I'm running a little low on time. This is a very interesting artist's rendition of how the planes would fly in and scoop these capsules loaded with film that would be basically launched from the Earth's atmosphere, or from Earth orbit into the atmosphere, cherry-picked by planes in midair, and then processed on land at Kodak Eastman facilities. This is a book of random numbers. It's something that I installed in my Division 3 installation. I won't get too into it, but there's another thing that was published by the RAND Corporation, and at the time was the largest collection of random number tables in existence, and random numbers are super important for scientific research, specifically regarding nuclear fission around this time, but now random numbers are equally important for processes of encryption. Skip over that. Okay. So if it isn't clear at this point, a big impulse for my project was the fact that military technology, and specifically surveillance technology, forms the basis of much of what we take for granted in terms of spatial and world awareness. So GPS, navigation systems, maps, the internet is essentially a military technology. Awareness, again, meaning both the perception of situation in the immediate sense and in the global sense, how we conceive of ourselves as individuals being part of the world. Beyond just casually connecting the dots between these different organizations, I believe that this relationship between military development and our awareness applies on the level of image production. The world as the battle space in that first email predicated on a conceit that the world is in fact a space that can be visualized and whose representations can be exploited for data. So this led me to maps. I'm going to play this video.
So that's how it evolves. It's becoming very, very personalized in order to have a different interpretation and a different goal with that map. So that's why not all maps are the same. All maps should be different and should be highly personalized based on what you want to achieve with it. There's no single map. So, like in cartography, in painting, there's different styles that can be applied. It's purely, it's visual. But if you push that a bit further, that visual should be different based on what you want to see in it. And maybe it's like when you're seeing a painting, an abstract painting, people see different things. The goal of a map is to present something different based on what you're trying to get the person to react to it. So it's kind of the opposite of a painting. But we're trying to force a certain behavior based on the new map that's been created.
So that was very interesting for me to hear. That was me interviewing a person, I won't say his name, but he was very kind to let me interview him and use his voice. Without wanting to indict the person speaking in the video, I think the semantics of what he's saying are extremely important. By way of this prolonged technical metaphor he was trying to give, this opposition of the painting and the map and the explicit didacticism of the maps that force behaviors describes to me a kind of critical stage in a mode of image production that we've reached in the 21st century. The photograph used as a kind of scientific tool, which can also be perceived as a photograph, or as kind of visually stimulating as a photograph. In order to be personalized, in order to be coercive, maps have to resemble what an individual believes the world to look like. Now, this relies on information that's both visual and not. So data like aerial images, but also like phone records that track somebody's movements, credit card transactions that can illustrate somebody's lifestyle. Much of this information we volunteer willingly when we check in to certain establishments on social media or use public Wi-Fi systems. These create signatures or patterns which for most US citizens are basically used to sell us stuff. But for a tribesperson in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Yemen or Somalia, the same strategy of pattern and signature development may be the only information used to put somebody's name on a kill list for a drone strike. The point being that what we see when we looked at anything purporting to be an image of the world is increasingly and irrevocably structured by equations, analytics, and systems unknown to us, and almost certainly motivated by the interest of a third party. To that end, I went about making my own images using still frames from films processed through software used to integrate map information. These are the images that are on display in the gallery. In conclusion, to kind of very quickly wrap up, my project was very much interested in critiquing all of the things that I've described previously, but not so much on a sort of moral or axiomatic register, but on the level of language and meaning making and signification. It's the fixity of the images that I'd like to call into question. Thank you. And I think there's 5 minutes for questions if anyone has any questions.
After doing all this, are you more or less afraid?
I was afraid the whole time. I'm just afraid in a much more specific and informed way. But I also, I don't, it's not like a paranoia. I don't constantly think, or maybe I was already constantly thinking that somebody was out to get me. But more I'm kind of aware of the fact that I'm constantly at the intersection of a bunch of different types of systems that are automated and that are based on instruments that I can also utilize, which was sort of the reason why I did this as a kind of art project rather than a research paper or something. I did do a ton of research, but I also wanted to mobilize the same sort of strategies that I can think of as being used against me in a way to illustrate how these aren't so much connected to reality.
It strikes me, 100 years ago they said knowledge is power. And now those in power have so much more knowledge that they have so much more power. And it is a little chilling to think about, I don't know how far back you go to find the little guy behind the curtain who's controlling it, or if this is just a system multiplying and nobody's really able to coordinate all this information and direct it to their own ends. I don't know.
That's the question. Is anybody? I mean, do you see?
Well, to reference Paul Virilio again, he has a rather strongly worded quote about the civilian terrorist, who is the civilian who unknowingly is participating and kind of generating the energies of these systems. I don't necessarily believe that's true, but I do believe that these systems are very, very complicated and huge, and at their core based on distortion and obfuscation, to the point where it's hard to pick a discrete point anywhere in this network and be able to accurately say these are the connecting line segments between person X or organization X and organization Y or effect Z or something like that. You can make those connections, but it always is kind of impartial. And I think this is what I was trying to get at too, is that there is this impartiality, diagnosis. This is more the philosophical register, that it's all kind of impartial, and the ability to conceive of these connections is necessarily kind of quixotic because it's so big. And so if there are individuals in power, it is happening obviously at the level of policies and like those types of semantic discrepancies, like between Rumsfeld and General Dick Myers, or in the 2002 torture memos when John Yoo wrote in a footnote that says everything described in these memos is our definition of torture, but the U.S. is not. We're not considering the U.S. participating in these activities, even though, essentially they described waterboarding, they described sensory deprivation, but with a footnote to sort of undo that relationship. That, I think, is really important and really hard to see when you become very concerned with how big and how kind of overwhelmingly powerful these organizations are, that individuals can still make decisions, even on a level as casual as phrasing, that does have a lot of power over people's lives. So that's a kind of roundabout non-answer. Maybe more of a qualification.
Do you see this data mining for as part of modernization of the American dream or something like this? And you're talking about like how it's used to sell people things and how that ties into consumerist culture and buying more things that you think you need.
Yeah, well, I mean, with surveillance, the kind of myth of surveillance is that, first of all, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And second of all, is that their surveillance is looking out for specific things. But it's become really, similarly to that tweet, kind of full spectrum. It's like affecting, being watched is something that affects us on many, many different aspects of our lifestyle, whether or not we're breaking laws or committing sedition. I mean, it's just another set of data that can be exploited by different, what in the business term you would call verticals, or kind of stacks of interests. So a lot of, again, the impulse for me was not just the relationship between military technology and camera technology, for instance, but also the relationship that public organizations like the government, or pseudo-public organizations, these collaborations that happen between them and private industries, which are mutually beneficial. So there's a reciprocity, but it's a kind of negative reciprocity depending on how you feel about late capitalism. But that aside, I don't remember exactly what your question was, but yes, I do see that they're all playing together in this insidious and self-reproducing sort of way.
Thank you. I was just wondering how you tripped on these connections.
how, I mean, I'm assuming this is all out there for
Yeah.
anyone to find, but
Yeah.
I just wonder how you found them.
A part of what I was interested in was setting up rules for myself. So if I'm creating images, never assume the perspective of the military. Don't use information that I've obtained illegally. I mean, basically everything that I found was unclassified or declassified information. So
do you Google? X and
I think
Y?
I just like followed things. I mean, finding In-Q-Tel was really important. I can't remember exactly how that happened, but I was reading about surveillance and I came across satellite surveillance, and then probably it was just some aside on some page somewhere. It's like, interestingly enough, like Keyhole, the name of the satellite was also this company, and then I looked at that company and then I found that there was this venture capitalist company. I mean, the big thing for me was the drone papers, which are like a huge cache of information, and then working out of that, which is really the positive and profound effects of whistleblowing, is providing that new availability of ways of thinking.
I just think we should all take a little comfort in the fact that the government could never manage to get that iPhone broken into.
Yeah. Although the government does have other relationships with Apple that aren't so public. And I mean, depending on what cell phone service you use, if you use AT&T, for instance, the NSA installed their own servers into AT&T's private server room, so they already have your information.
Which makes us wonder why they needed to break into the iPhone.
Exactly. Well, that was to set a precedent, but that is a totally different thing altogether. Anyway, it's 3:30 now. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming.